the annual Founders' Day banquet in the elegant Grand Meridian Hotel, my mother, Evelyn Mercer, stood beneath a chandelier and introduced my younger brother, Julian, as the future of our family, while joking that I was still playing with little businesses and pretty things. Nearly 80 guests laughed, and although I was standing beside a display of floral installations that my company had designed for the entire event, I simply smiled because I had spent 36 years learning that defending myself only gave my family another reason to call me difficult. My name is Naomi Mercer, and unlike Julian, who had recently become a celebrated executive at our family's construction company, I had built my own event design studio from a borrowed van, a folding table, and a handful of loyal clients who believed in my work when nobody in my family did. What my mother never understood was that my small studio had quietly grown into a thriving operation, and the reason I had never bragged about it was not because I was failing, but because I had finally stopped measuring success by whether Evelyn could mention my name proudly at dinner. That evening, however, something felt different because my mother kept making comments that seemed carefully designed to remind everyone that Julian was the responsible child, while I was the unpredictable one. And when she laughed about how I probably still needed Dad's old credit card to survive, I noticed several guests exchanging uncomfortable glances. I almost corrected her, but then the hotel manager approached me with a nervous smile and whispered, "Naomi, we have a serious problem upstairs," before handing me a folder that contained invoices, payment records, and an email chain I had never seen before. The problem was not my company at all, but a major financial disaster involving Julian's division of Mercer Construction, where several expensive contracts had been approved under my father's old authorization procedures, and millions of dollars were suddenly unaccounted for after a series of questionable transfers. The strangest part was that my name appeared repeatedly in the paperwork as a consultant supposedly responsible for approving several transactions, even though I had never worked for the construction company, never signed those documents, and had never even seen some of the projects listed in the files. I realized immediately that someone had been using my reputation as a convenient shield, because my studio had recently become the preferred event supplier for several corporate clients, and my business records were clean enough to make suspicious paperwork look legitimate at first glance. When I confronted my mother privately in an empty hallway, she did not look surprised. Instead, she lowered her voice and said, "You have no idea how much trouble you could cause if you start asking questions." And that sentence told me more than any document ever could. I returned to the banquet hall and watched Julian accept another round of applause while my mother described him as the man who had supposedly saved the family business. And for the first time, I understood why everyone had been encouraged to believe I was irresponsible. The family story had been carefully constructed so that if the company collapsed, Julian would remain the brilliant son who had tried to rescue it, while I would become the convenient outsider whose supposed mistakes could be blamed for anything that went wrong. Instead of confronting them in front of the guests, I quietly called Marcus Hale, an accountant who had helped me establish my studio years earlier, and asked him to examine the documents without telling anyone in my family what he found. By midnight, Marcus had identified altered signatures, duplicated invoices, and transfers routed through companies that had no visible connection to my business. And he warned me that the evidence suggested someone had deliberately created a financial trail designed to point toward me if investigators came looking. The following morning, I walked into my mother's kitchen with a thick envelope under my arm and found Evelyn sitting beside Julian, both of them expecting me to apologize for embarrassing the family at the banquet. But instead, I placed the envelope on the table and said, "I came here because I want to give you one chance to tell me the truth before someone else asks you the same question under oath." Julian's confidence disappeared almost instantly when he saw copies of the documents, while my mother stared at me and finally admitted that Julian had borrowed heavily against company accounts to keep several failing projects alive, and that she had helped hide the problem because she believed protecting her favorite child was more important than protecting me. I could have destroyed Julian publicly, But I chose something harder because I handed the evidence to an independent attorney, stepped away from the family company entirely, and refused to participate in the cover-up even when my mother begged me to think about our family name. Months later, the investigation cleared me completely. Julian faced the consequences of his decisions, and my studio received a major contract from the same hotel where my mother had once mocked me, proving that the life she dismissed as insignificant had become the one thing I could build without anyone else's permission. I never received the dramatic apology I once imagined because my mother remained convinced that admitting she had chosen one child over another would mean admitting that decades of comparison had been cruel. But I finally understood that I did not need her confession to know the truth about myself. I had not been the weak daughter, the irresponsible daughter, or the daughter who needed rescuing. I had simply been the daughter they underestimated, and sometimes the most powerful response to being treated as insignificant is not revenge, but building a life so solid that nobody else gets to define its value. So please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.